Suzanne Spaak gave her life to save hundreds of Jewish children in Nazi-occupied Paris. She set up an underground network to keep them in hiding and joined an intelligence-gathering organization to fight German oppression.
And yet she undertook this incredible task of organizing a network of people to rescue Jewish children from Auschwitz.
Paris, 1942. The city once celebrated for its charm and beauty had turned into a place of fear and suspicion. The cafes that once buzzed with lively debates were now muted, their patrons casting wary glances at one another. The cobbled streets that used to echo with music and laughter now reverberated with the harsh rhythm of German boots. Every street corner was a potential trap, and for the Jewish community of Paris, every day was lived under the suffocating blanket of terror. At every turn, Jewish families faced new decrees and restrictions. Curfews, yellow stars, and identity checks became a way of life. Entire families disappeared overnight, homes were abandoned, and the silence that followed was more haunting than the shouts of the soldiers. For those who knew Paris as a beacon of culture and liberty, the transformation was unbearable to witness. But in the midst of this despair, there were those who chose to defy. One of these individuals was Suzanne Spaak, a figure who seemed to embody the contrasting worlds of privilege and resistance. Born into a wealthy Belgian banking family and married to a prominent playwright, Claude Spaak, Suzanne had lived a life filled with luxury, art, and high society gatherings. Her portrait, painted by the surrealist master René Magritte, symbolized a life of elegance and influence, but appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the facade of a Parisian socialite was a woman who burned with a sense of justice that could not be extinguished. Suzanne, a devoted mother of 2 young children, felt the war's cruelty creep closer every day. The transformation in Paris, once her beloved second home, became unbearable. She would walk through the streets, haunted by the sounds of weeping. The sight of once vibrant neighborhoods turned into ghostly remnants of what they once were. And then there were the children, the little ones clutching their mother's skirts, the haunted eyes of toddlers peering out from behind cracked shutters. Innocence shattered by a war they could not understand. It was these sights that hardened her resolve and led her to a decision that would change her life and the lives of many others, forever. She could no longer simply observe from her comfortable position on the sidelines. No amount of wealth or privilege could absolve her of responsibility. These were children, mothers, families, and she too was a mother. She would fight for them, because to do nothing was unthinkable. When Suzanne first approached the National Movement Against Racism, MNCR, in 1942, she wasn't taken seriously. To the resistance members, she seemed out of place, a wealthy socialite in furs and pearls, offering to help. They looked at her polished nails and tailored dresses, and then at each other, suppressing smiles of disbelief. What could this privileged woman possibly know of danger, of sacrifice? But Suzanne's eyes, filled with a mix of determination and anguish, told a different story. She was not there for thrill-seeking or adventure. She was there because the suffering around her had become too much to bear. As B. Aronson, one of the resistance members, later recounted, they were doubtful at first but quickly realized their mistake. This was a woman who was willing to give up everything, her safety, her home, even her life, for the cause. "Tell me what to do," she had said simply, her voice steady, unflinching, "so I'll know I am serving in the struggle against the Third Reich." The room fell silent. This was no casual volunteer, no thrill-seeker looking for an outlet in troubled times. Suzanne Spaak had made her choice, and it was irrevocable. At first, her assignments were mundane, delivering messages, typing leaflets, providing food to those in hiding. But it wasn't enough. With each mission, each act of defiance, Suzanne felt herself drawn deeper into the shadows. She wanted to do more, to confront the evil head-on, to make a real difference. Her devotion to the cause was absolute, and she never flinched, no matter the danger. Gradually, she gained the trust of the resistance members. They began to assign her riskier missions, gathering intelligence, securing safe houses, transporting documents. Suzanne's transformation from a sheltered socialite to a hardened resistance operative was rapid and complete. Gone were the elegant gowns and pearls. In their place were practical clothes, sturdy shoes, and a cold fire in her eyes. But Suzanne's deepest calling, the mission that would define her and ultimately seal her fate, was not about military victories or sabotage. It was about the children. The news spread like wildfire. Jewish children in Paris were being rounded up. The Germans had decided to expedite their deportations, starting with the most vulnerable. Entire families were torn apart. Parents were sent to work camps, while children, innocent, bewildered, were shoved onto trains bound for destinations no one dared name. The fear and confusion in the eyes of these little ones broke Suzanne's heart. She thought of her own children. Lucy, with her bright laughter and endless questions, and little Louis with his mischievous grin. How could anyone do this to children? How could the world stand by and allow it? The thought consumed her, driving her to action. It was then that she made contact with the Red Orchestra, a network of resistance fighters operating across Europe. They were a dangerous, high-profile group, known for their intelligence gathering and their daring operations. And Suzanne, with her connections and her wealth, was exactly what they needed. The operation they planned was monumental. They would smuggle over 160 Jewish children out of Paris and scatter them across the French countryside to safety. Suzanne threw herself into the task, using her high social standing to arrange false documents and secure ration cards. She worked tirelessly, knocking on the doors of priests, doctors, and teachers, anyone who might be convinced to shelter a child, to protect a life that the Germans deemed worthless. Every time she secured a new hiding place, every time a sympathetic soul agreed to take in a child, Suzanne felt a surge of hope. It was dangerous work, deception layered upon deception. But for the first time since the occupation began, Suzanne felt truly alive. She was no longer a passive observer, she was a fighter. When the roundup began in early 1943, Suzanne and her comrades were ready. One by one, she took the children from UGIF centers, frightened little ones clutching their few possessions, their eyes wide with confusion and terror. Suzanne would crouch down, smile softly, and whisper words of comfort. "We're going on a little adventure," she would say, holding out her hand. "Stay close to me and everything will be all right." For many of these children, Suzanne's face would be the last one they remembered from their old life, before they were hidden away, given new names, new families, new identities. The operations were complex and dangerous. They had to move quickly, navigating checkpoints, bribing officials, and constantly changing routes to evade detection. One night, Suzanne led a group of 10 children through the darkened streets of Paris, their small hands clutching hers tightly. Every sound, every stray dog, every gust of wind seemed amplified in the silence. At one checkpoint, a German soldier shone a light directly into Suzanne's face. "Who are these children?" he barked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Suzanne's heart raced, but she forced herself to smile calmly. "My pupils," she replied lightly, holding up a forged document. "We're on our way to a new school in the countryside." The soldier's eyes narrowed, scanning the faces of the children. Suzanne held her breath. The silence stretched on, unbearable. And then with a grunt, the soldier waved them through. Suzanne exhaled softly, squeezing the children's hands in reassurance. They made it to the safe house that night, and as the children curled up on the floor to sleep, Suzanne sat watching over them, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. Over the next few months, Suzanne's involvement deepened. Her home, once a place of elegance and serenity, became a hub of clandestine activity. Maps were spread out on the dining room table, ration cards tucked into the pages of children's books, and suitcases packed with essentials hidden in the closets. The constant threat of discovery hung over them like a dark cloud, but Suzanne didn't waver. She became adept at creating false identities, using her connections in high society to forge documents and bribe officials. Each time a new child was saved, it felt like a victory, a tiny triumph against the monstrous machine of the Third Reich. But the Gestapo was closing in. Their eyes and ears were everywhere, and betrayal could come from anyone, a neighbor, a colleague, even a friend. One day, Suzanne received a warning. A young woman she had worked with, a girl not much older than her own daughter, had been arrested. The news sent a shiver of dread through the network. Would she talk? Would she give them away? Suzanne knew the risks. Each time she left her home, she would kiss her children goodbye as if it were the last time. She would look into their eyes and wonder if they would ever see her again. But she went anyway. For every child she saved, the danger grew. But so did her resolve. Then, in October 1943, disaster struck. The Gestapo had been monitoring her for weeks, watching her movements, tracking her contacts. In the early hours of the morning, they stormed her family's apartment. Lucy and Louis were asleep when the soldiers burst in, shouting and tearing through their home. Suzanne's husband, Claude, tried to intervene, but he was pushed aside brutally. "Take the children," Suzanne whispered desperately to him. "Keep them safe." Before she could say more, she was dragged away, her hands bound behind her back. As she was shoved into the waiting truck, she caught a final glimpse of her children's terrified faces peeking out from behind the door. The image would haunt her for the rest of her life. Suzanne was taken to Frayne prison, a brutal facility south of Paris known for its horrific conditions and torture chambers. There, she was beaten, starved, and interrogated relentlessly. But Suzanne never broke. Not a single name, not a single location passed her lips. In the filth and isolation of her cell, Suzanne's only solace was the thought of those children, now safe and hidden because of her. She would trace patterns on the wall with her fingers, imagining the faces of the little ones she had helped. In a letter smuggled out to her husband, she wrote, "Tell Lucy and Louis that their mother loves them. They must be brave. Tell them I did this for them, so they may grow up in a world without fear." The days in Frayne prison stretched endlessly. Suzanne had always been strong-willed, but the cold, the hunger, and the solitude took their toll. Each day the guards would come, barking orders, dragging her to the interrogation room. They would ask the same questions over and over again, trying to break her spirit. Who are your contacts? Where are the children? Who is hiding them? But Suzanne remained steadfast. Even when they screamed at her, even when they deprived her of sleep and food, she would stare back at them with a calm that only infuriated her captors more. "Do you really think you're saving them?" One guard sneered, leaning close to her, his face twisted with hatred. "Do you think you'll see your own children again?" Suzanne clenched her fists under the table, forcing herself not to react. She couldn't afford to show them how much their words hurt. She couldn't afford to let them know the depths of her fear. Instead, she lifted her chin and looked the guard squarely in the eye. "I have already saved them," she replied softly, her voice steady despite the quiver in her heart. "And nothing you do will change that." The guard's face contorted in rage. He slammed his fist on the table, the sound reverberating through the small room. But Suzanne didn't flinch. After all, what more could they take from her? She had already given everything, her home, her safety, her life. What remained was her will, and that she would never surrender. In the darkness of her cell, Suzanne held on to hope. She had heard whispers through the walls. The Allies were advancing. Normandy had been invaded, and the Germans were beginning to lose their grip on France. Liberation was coming. Maybe, just maybe, she would see her children again. As the summer of 1944 turned to August, the tension in the prison became palpable. There was a frantic urgency among the guards, a barely contained panic. The Allies were closing in on Paris, and it was only a matter of time before the city would be free. The prisoners whispered among themselves, their voices hushed but filled with cautious hope. But hope was dangerous. As the Allies advanced, the Gestapo began destroying records, covering their tracks, and preparing to flee. And with them, they took their revenge on those who had resisted. Executions became a daily occurrence, the sound of gunshots echoing through the courtyards. Each night, the prisoners would count the names of the missing, their hearts heavy with dread. Then, on the morning of August 12th, Suzanne's time came. The cell door clanged open, and she was yanked to her feet, her legs unsteady from weeks of malnutrition. She stumbled, but caught herself, straightening her back as best she could. There was no time to prepare, no time to say goodbye. She was marched down the long, narrow corridor, the sound of her footsteps mingling with the shouts and cries of the other prisoners. When they reached the courtyard, the sunlight was blinding. Suzanne blinked, trying to focus. The guards stood in a line, their faces hard and expressionless. And then she saw him, the officer in charge, the man with the cold, dead eyes, Heinz Panwitz, a high-ranking Gestapo officer known for his cruelty. "On your knees," he barked. Suzanne hesitated only a moment. Then, with as much dignity as she could muster, she sank to her knees. she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. She had stared into the face of oblivion more times than she could count, in the eyes of the children she saved, in the empty rooms of the deported families. But today she would not face it with fear. She would face it with the knowledge that she had done everything she could. "Any last words?" Panwitz sneered. Suzanne closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of Lucy and Louis. She thought of the children she had saved, scattered across the countryside, safe and hidden. She thought of their smiles, their laughter, innocence preserved in a world gone mad. When she opened her eyes, she looked straight at Panwitz. "I am not afraid," she said softly. The shot rang out, shattering the silence. Suzanne Spaak, mother, wife, resistance fighter, fell forward into the dirt. She was only 39 years old. 13 days later, Paris was liberated. Allied forces marched triumphantly into the city, greeted by jubilant crowds waving flags and throwing flowers. The streets of Paris, once shrouded in fear, were filled with the sounds of victory, cheers, music, and the pealing of church bells. The City of Light had been reclaimed, but for those who had fought in the shadows, there was little time for celebration. The members of Suzanne's network, those who had managed to survive, began the heartbreaking task of piecing together the fates of their comrades. Many of them had been captured, tortured, and executed, but their sacrifice had not been in vain. The children Suzanne had risked everything for, were safe. All 160 of them, hidden in convents, farmhouses, and the homes of strangers, they had survived the war. And as the resistance members tracked them down one by one, they thought of Suzanne. It was because of her courage, her unwavering determination, that these lives had been saved. Claude Spaak, Suzanne's husband, was devastated by the news of her passing. He had clung to the hope that she would be among the liberated, that they would be reunited, that she would come home. But it was not to be. He returned to Belgium with their children, Lucy and Louis, who had been sheltered by relatives throughout the war. Lucy was 16, Louis only 12. They struggled to comprehend the loss of their mother, the mother who had sacrificed everything for others. It would take years for them to fully grasp the magnitude of her courage, to understand that their mother had been a hero, not just to them, but to the world. In the decades that followed, Suzanne Spaak's story was slowly pieced together. Survivors spoke of her bravery, of the way she had moved through the city with quiet determination, risking her life time and again for the children she called her little ones. They remembered her gentle smile, her soothing voice, the way she would hold their hands and promise that everything would be all right. In 1985, Yad Vashem honored Suzanne Spaak as righteous among the nations, a recognition given to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. It was a bittersweet tribute. Suzanne had not lived to see the world recognize her bravery. She had not lived to see the children she saved grow up, to witness the generation she had made possible. But her legacy endures. Today, Suzanne's story is taught in schools across France and Belgium. Her name is inscribed in memorials, and her life is celebrated as an example of what it means to be truly courageous. She was not a soldier or a politician. She did not lead armies or make speeches. She was a mother who loved fiercely, who believed that every child deserved a chance to live. For Lucy and Louis, their mother's story became both a source of pride and pain. They grew up knowing that they were the children of a hero, but also knowing that this heroism had cost them the chance to grow up with her by their side. But they carried her memory with them, passing on her story to their own children, ensuring that Suzanne Spaak's light would never be extinguished. And so, Suzanne's legacy lives on. She stands as a testament to the power of love and the strength of the human spirit. She is a reminder that even in the darkest times, one person's courage can make a difference. Her story is not just about the past, it is a call to action for the present and the future. It is a reminder that we all have a choice, to stand by in silence, or to stand up and fight for what is right. Suzanne chose the latter, and because of her, 160 children lived. May her courage inspire us all to be better, to be braver, and to never ever turn away from those in need.